What's up everybody, Soul here with another sort of Convallaria video, and today we're going to be taking a look at the different characters and their traits to determine what characters should be prioritized in memory shard farming. Now in this list, I'm not going over these characters as a guide and telling you which characters are best. That's not what this list is about. So when you see a character in tier 0, it doesn't mean that they are particularly a tier 0 character, so much as that their benefit from their trait is tier 0, if that makes sense. And that they should be prioritized in farming those shards. Of course, this is all my opinion, and I have to give a few things just as a little bit of a disclaimer, and that is that every character absolutely benefits from having 5 stars. No two ways about it. That is absolutely true. And then if you play a character and you like a character more than another, then you should prioritize that character. If you're basing your gameplay and your teams all around a specific character or specific characters, then you should absolutely 5-star those characters, no matter what the meta or anyone else dictates, because that is what's going to benefit you the most. This game works with all characters, so you get to play the way you want to, and it should be encouraged. With that all said, let's take a look at these characters, their traits, and talk about which ones should be prioritized. So, first and foremost, let's take a look at our boy, Acambe. So Acambe has a great trait. It's called National Merchant. At 1 star, his attack is increased by 5%, his max energy is increased to 7, and for every 3 energy he owns, he gains 1 energy at the end of his turn. And then when Shadow Assassins are present, he gains Secret Signal with a 5-turn cooldown. It's a big old cooldown. Now at 2 stars, his attack is increased to 10%. However, everything else stays exactly the same. At 3 stars, we see a little bit of a shift. He now gets a max energy of 9, and his cooldown is reduced to 3 turns instead of 5, and the damage dealt by Secret Signal is additionally increased by 15%. And so right there we see a big difference between his 3-star trait and his 1-star trait. So that's a break point in my opinion. And then at 4 stars, Acambe's attack is the same, max energy is the same. All of it looks generally the same. The only difference, is that his attack is increased by 15% instead of that 10%. Everything else is the same. Then at 5 stars, his attack is the same. His max energy is increased to 9 still, and for every 3 energy owned, he still gets the 1. Of course, the Shadow Assassin and the Secret Signal is the same. The cooldown is the same of 3 turns. The only difference is that he's now gaining an additional 3 initial energy at the start of battle, which is a big deal. But is it a big enough deal? It's not each turn. He gets 3 energy at the start of battle. So for me, I don't know if that's enough. I think Acambe really gets the most out of his trait at 3 stars, and then I think that is a healthy stopping point. If you want to stop with him, his 5-star just doesn't do enough for me. It's a heavy investment for something that gives little yield. Of course, if you like Acambe, keep on rolling. But if you don't, or maybe if you just think he's mid, that's where I would stop with him. And so for that reason, I would absolutely put Acambe at 3 stars. Tier 2 at 3 stars. Up next is Afra. She's a fantastic unit that has a lot going on. Her trait is called Dream Catch. I'm not going to go into great detail. You can check out the guide if you want to and learn more about it. Just going over her trait really quickly. Her magic attack and healing is increased by 6%, and she's immune to frosty tiles. At the end of the turn, she inflicts Nightmare on all enemies within 3 tiles of the character. And then if they already have Nightmare, she additionally inflicts Labyrinth of Dreams 1. And of course, that lasts for 2 turns. Now, at 2 stars, we don't see a huge difference. Her magic attack stays the same, but she is gaining 1 movement instead, and now she gets 1 movement instead of none. And then she is inflicting Nightmare on all enemies within 4 tiles. So that's a pretty nice little boon there at 2 stars. And then at 3 stars, her magic attack and healing is increased to 8% instead of 6. But she is also increasing the range of Nightmare around her by 5 tiles. And inflicting 1 level 2 debuff. So that's a big difference from her 3-star trait compared to her 1. And so that's a big difference. I consider that maybe even a break point. However, at 4 stars, her magic attack is increased to 10% instead of 8, and now she's able to get an additional 2 movement out of her trait. And then we still have the same on the others as far as her nightmare being 5 tiles and so on. Now at 5 stars, her magic attack and healing is increased by 12% instead of the 10 at 4 stars. She's still immune to frost tiles. Her movement is still increased by 2. And then now she's inflicting nightmare on enemies within 6 tiles of her. And then she is now inflicting Labyrinth of Dreams 2 instead of Labyrinth of Dreams 1. And so Labyrinth of Dreams 2 basically makes it to where she's able to apply accumulation of all damage taken during the duration of Labyrinth of Dreams up to 600% instead of 400% in Labyrinth of Dreams 1. And so that's a big jump in the possible amount of damage accumulated by 200%. I'd say it's a really big jump. And so for me, that makes her an absolute must 5-star unit. However, I could easily say that her priority in raising her to 5 stars is not the most, so I would rank her as a tier 3 unit that should be at 5 stars. So not a lot of urgency in getting her to 5 stars, but she absolutely gets the most out of 5 stars instead of any other level of her trait. So if you're going to use her, get her to 5 stars if possible. Just not a huge priority there. That makes sense. And so moving on, and up next in our list is of course going to be Agata. And so Agata, another great unit, her trait is called Silver Wolf Queen. And so at the start of battle, Agata gains Woven Awakening 1 and her HP is increased by 15%. After attacking, for each stack of wound the target has, Agata inflicts piercing damage equal to 4% of her HP. And it can be activated 2 times per round. Agata ignores the effect of Frosty, and after dealing physical damage, she inflicts 1 stack of wound, up to 4 stacks lasting for 2 turns. And so that Woven Awakening is pretty nice in that it increases her attack and her defense. And then, of course, before attacking, if they have wound, she's doing an increased physical damage to them by 5%. So Woven Awakening is really, really good. Now, at 2 stars, we see that she, instead of doing 4% piercing damage, 4% of her HP, now she's doing 7% of her HP as piercing damage. And so we get a pretty decent boost there of 3%. And then at 3 stars, we get Woven Awakening 2. So now we get a bigger boost to her attack and defense. And then we're also getting movement out of her Woven Awakening, which is a big deal. And then on top of that, now her HP is increased to 30% instead of 15%. However, the rest of her trait stays the same. So this is still a pretty big buff. And at 3 stars, you can say she's definitely gained a lot. At 4 stars, start of battle, she still gets Awakening 2. She still gets HP at 30%. However, the piercing damage that she is dealing is now equal to 10% of her HP. That's a really big jump. And so that's a really healthy amount. Everybody knows you play Agata, you want to put as much HP as you can on her because she's going to absolutely shred and do tons of damage. And so that's a really good change there at 4 stars, where she's doing a lot more damage. And then at 5 stars, she's getting Woven Awakening 3. And so this gives you the most. Of course, her attack and her defense are increased to 20%. She's getting to 2 movement. She gains climb and jump. And then her single target attacks now have armor piercing. And then if the target has wound, and she's just getting a lot out of that Woven Awakening now. Past that, everything else stays the same. That is a really big buff out of that Woven Awakening 3. And so for me, Agata is a character that really benefits a lot from having 5 stars, but it is not absolutely necessary. I think Agata can stop at 4 stars and get everything she needs and do a really good job. And I think it is a pretty high priority that you get it up there. So for me, Agata is tier 0.5, but you can stop at 4 stars and feel okay. Of course, 5 stars is better, but you can stop at 4 stars. With that said, let's take a look at who is next, and that is Alexei. And so Alexei has the trait Brute Bear Blood. Alexei becomes immune to resolve, or no resolve, and his attack is increased by 10%. He ignores the effects of frosty tiles. Alexei possesses unlimited resolve until the start of his next turn, and his trait attribute bonuses double. this effect has a cooldown of 7 turns. So that's a pretty decent trait. At 2 stars, we see that his attack jumps up to 15% instead of 10%. However, everything else still stays the same. At 3 stars, he has the same attack. However, when he gets that unlimited resolve, at the start of the next turn, he dispels 2 buffs and gains toughness. And so now he's immune to the attributes of dying and injured. He no longer suffers those penalties, and that's a pretty big deal. And so that's a nice boon at 3 stars. At 4 stars, his attack is increased by 20%. And then, of course, everything else stays the same. And then at 5 stars, his attack is still 20%. And he gets that unlimited resolve until the start of the next 2 rounds. So that unlimited resolve now lasts longer. Instead of 1 round, it now lasts 2 rounds. And then he spells that 2 buffs still. And everything else stays the same. So Alexei has a pretty decent trait. It doesn't really get that much better over the course of the star value. In my opinion, a great stopping point for Alexei is 3 stars. 5 stars, of course, is beneficial to him, but 3 stars gets you everything that you need. And for that reason, I think Alexei is a tier 3 character where you can stop at 3 stars. Up next is Auguste. And so for Mr. Auguste, we can take a look at his trait, and that is Sword Wrath. Auguste ignores block. After initiating an active attack, he enters standby. He gains 1 stack of rage up to 6 stacks. When having 6 stacks of rage, after actively using a skill or basic attack, Auguste removes all stacks and can act again, gaining Rage Outburst 1. And of course, that Rage Outburst is a nice buff to his magic attack and physical attack. Pretty decent stuff. Now at 2 stars, he's still ignoring block. And then of course, he's still getting a lot of the same benefit of getting that 1 stack of rage. He's still stacking rage up to 6. The difference here is that he, at the start of battle, gains 2 stacks of rage. So that's a pretty decent buff there at 2 stars. At 3 stars, he now is able to unlock Rage Outburst 2. And he'll recover 1 energy. And so that is 70% is added to, add 70% of magic attack to his physical attack at Rage Outburst 2. So that's a really big buff there. And he's getting a lot stronger for that reason. And of course, now he's also getting that energy. At 4 stars, he's still ignoring block. He's still max stack of 6, and so on and so forth. However, now he's also gaining 4 stacks of rage at the beginning of battle. So 4 stars is a really good breakpoint, because now you're getting a ton of energy at the start of the battle, and you're able to get into that rage outburst faster. At 5 stars, now he is able to Rage Outburst 3. And then that is at 70% magic attack to physical attack. And then he gains Armor Piercing. That's a really big one for me. And he's also now recovering 2 energy instead of 1. So for me, that is a big difference. Getting Armor Piercing on all of his attacks. And then also 2 energy. I really value energy a lot in these traits. You'll see that. For me, that's a big difference. And so for me, Auguste absolutely benefits the most from his trait at 5 stars. And I do think, because his core mechanic is based around that Rage Outburst, it is of high priority to get there. So he is tier 0 for me. 5 stars, tier 0 on Auguste. Now up next is Ayishah. And so with her trait, it is called Bright Moon. Physical damage dealt is considered magical damage, and at the start of the battle, she gains a skill, Moon's Caress, and so that is her instant skill that selects an ally and grants them Pledge. And when she's near that character, she gains On Duty. Performs an assisting cover to allies with Pledge within 3 tiles, and at the end or start of the character's turn, if there are allies with Pledge within 3 tiles, she gains On Duty, as we just read off Moon's Caress. She adds 25% of her physical and magical defense to her attack, and at the end of the turn, when having on duty, heals the character and allies with pledge for 40% of her physical attack. So it's a really nice, powerful trait. All right, there it's 1 star. At 2 stars, she gains attack and defense by 5%, making that a little bit better overall. Her a little bit better overall. At 3 stars, that attack and defense is boosted up to 10%. And then she is now also giving her pledge an increased damage of 20% and damage reduction of 20%. At 4 stars, her ability to give her pledge that attack damage boost and physical damage resistance boost is also given to herself as long as she has on duty. So now she's getting a bonus 20% damage and damage reduction for just being on duty. So it's really good, powerful buff at 4 stars. And at 5 stars, she's now getting an attack and defense boost of 15%. She is now adding 40% of her physical and magical defense to her attack. And at the end of the turn, when having on duty, she dispels 2 debuffs off the character and allies with pledge and heals them for 80% of Ayishah's physical attack and restoring 1 energy. This increases damage to the same amount, 20, and then physical damage resistance of 20, still the same. So at 5 stars, it gets a massive buff. We're getting energy, we're getting debuffs, we're getting 80% heal, and then we're getting a huge spike in her amount of physical attack she's getting from her defense, and then we're getting a nice little 5% buff to her attack and defense overall. So her 5-star form kind of pops off and goes crazy. That's why I have Ayishah as a tier 0.5 and a 5-star trait necessary on her. She really pops off at that point and becomes unreal. Up next is our girl Beryl. And so Beryl comes in with her trait, I'm a Genius. Her magic attack is increased by 8%. And at the start of the turn, she has a 50% chance to gain 1 random level 2 buff. And she'll additionally recover 1 energy. Now at 2 stars, her magic attack is boosted up to 12%, and she has a 60% chance of getting that level 2 buff. 3 stars, 16%, 70% chance level 2 buff, and 1 energy. And then of course at 4 stars, now she has a 20% boost to her magic attack, which is pretty big, and then an 80% chance to get that level 2 buff. And then at 5 stars, 25% boost to magic attack, which is a lot. That is very big. And a 100% chance to get that buff. And then, of course, that 1 energy. But for me, unless you're just absolutely hunting down that magic attack, which I don't blame you if you love Beryl, you're not getting anything else out of her trait. I think the level 2 buff is negligible because we can get them so frequently and so often in so many different ways. So getting it off the trait doesn't seem necessary. And then that energy you're getting no matter what, even at 1 star. So for me, Beryl is a tier 5, 1-star character. No need to star her up. Up next is our girl Caris. And so Caris comes in with her trait, Light Oracle. Caris' trait affects a range of 4 tiles. When an ally within a certain range of Caris casts a non-instant skill, she gains 1 stack of Revelation, 4 tiles being that range, can be triggered up to 5 times per round. And at the start of the turn, if she has 9 or more stacks of Revelation, she consumes 9 stacks and gains Light Oracle. Light Oracle is like a souped up, more powerful version of her attacks. It's really nice to get bonus effects, bonus damage, the whole 9. At 2 stars, Caris' magic attack is boosted up to 5%. Nothing else changes in her trait, just a nice little boost to her magic attack. At 3 stars, now her magic attack is boosted to 10%. And then her trait now has an effect range of 5 tiles. Also, at the start of the battle, she gains 6 stacks of Revelation now. So at 3 stars, she really pops off and gets a lot more out of her trait than she did initially. At 4 stars, her magic attack is now jumped up to 15%, and she is still getting that 5 range tile. Nothing else really changes other than that magic attack getting a nice little boost. And then at 5 stars, her magic attack stays the same at 15%, but the trait affects a range of 5 tiles still. However, at the start of the battle, she now gets 8 stacks of Revelation. And at the end of the turn, she additionally gains 3 stacks of Revelation. instead of just 1. Really nice. And then when an ally within a certain range casts an ability, on instant of course, 1 stack of Revelation still given, up 5 times per round. Perfect. Everything stays the same. The only difference is she consumes 9 stacks to get that Light Oracle, and now she's getting 1 energy on top of all of it. So Caris really comes alive at 5 stars. Everybody knows it. So for her, in order for her to function and do well, she really needs to have that 5-star trait to see the best of her and to really see her go crazy. And so for me, Caris is a tier 0 5-star character. Up next is our girl Coco, and in my opinion, she is the best character in the game. Just want to throw that in there. Her trait is Breakfast Happiness, and where Coco possesses a block, and at the start of each round, she grants breakfast to an ally with the lowest HP within 2 tiles of herself. After a breakfast or bento effect is triggered, the target has a 30% chance to gain happiness, which happiness is a -1 to the energy cost of a skill, and then after its use, it also reduces its cooldown by 1. Very, very powerful buff there with happiness. Now at 2 stars, Coco now gets 10% HP bonus from her trait. That's the only difference there at 2 stars, but at 3 stars, now we're looking at her giving 2 allies instead of just 1. 2 allies with the lowest HP within 2 tiles of herself, breakfast and or bento, but everything else stays the same. And then at 4 stars, her HP is boosted by 20% now, which is a lot. That is a big buff from a trait. And then at the start of the round, she's still given 2 allies within 2 tiles of herself, that breakfast and or bento, with a 30% chance of happiness. However, at 5 stars, it goes bonkers. I don't know how and why we jump from 30% to 100%, but I love it. So Coco, at 5 stars, she gets that 20% HP, and then of course at the start of the round, 2 allies with the lowest HP within 2 tiles of herself get that breakfast and or bento, and then, or that breakfast, and then when breakfast and or bento is triggered, the target gains happiness, just period, dot. So no matter what, anytime she is given that breakfast out at the start of her turn, or when she's using that iron pot stew or whatever, given that bento, she is reducing the energy cost of all of her allies' skills, and then when they use those skills, reducing the cooldown of those skills by 1 turn. Absolutely busted, overpowered, longest thing running I've seen in the game, where I just absolutely want it all the time, and I haven't seen anything replace it. So for me, Coco really thrives at 5 stars. She becomes unreal at 5 stars, and you really are going to struggle to not play her. That's my opinion, of course. And so for me, she is a tier 0 character at 5 stars. Up next is our girl Cole. She comes in with her trait Killer Instinct, and so Cole possesses Jump. If there are no allies within 2 tiles of Cole, her physical attack and crit is increased by 5%. She can act again after launching an active attack on an enemy from the side or behind and defeating them with a 3-turn cooldown. At 2 stars, we see she gets a nice 5% boost on that to her physical attack and crit when there's no allies nearby, making a total of 10 now instead of the 5. And at 3 stars, it remains 10. However, that cooldown of the act again drops to 2 turns. And then at 4 stars, we see that she is now getting a physical attack and crit boost of 15%, as long as there's no allies nearby. And then at 5 stars, we see that that cooldown drops yet again to 1 turn, but everything else stays the same. Cole's trait overall, in my opinion, is not very strong. We have a lot of characters with Act Again now, and it's a very powerful mechanic, but to have a cooldown on it now is very dated. And so it really doesn't serve Cole well. Her trait, to me, is not worth leveling, and I think the breakpoint is 3 stars, where you're getting that 2-turn cooldown on it. For the most part, Cole's tough to use nowadays with the in-game content and everything else, so that's where I'd stop with her. So that makes Cole a tier 4 character with a 3-star suggestion from me as far as where you should stop on farming her memory shards. Of course, if you love Cole and you're using her, keep going. Do you. There's nothing wrong with that. Play the game your way. But that's what I'd suggest. Up next, we've got our boy Dantalion, and so he comes in with his trait Path of Kingship. This increases Dantalion's attack and defense 5%, and for every 1 character defeated in battle, he recovers 20% HP and 1 energy. That's just a period dot. No matter if they're good, they're bad, friend, foe, it just don't matter. He's getting that, and it's nice. At 2 stars, Dantalion's attack and defense is boosted up to 10%. However, the heal is still the same. At 3 stars, we see that when a character is defeated in battle, he now gets 30% HP back and still gets that 1 energy. And then at 4 stars, his attack and defense is boosted up to 15%, but the heal stays at 30% still. And then in the final 5-star form, Dantalion's HP, attack, and defense are all boosted by 15%. That's pretty big. And then for every 1 character defeated in battle, he's now gaining 35% HP back, but still that 1 energy. This is a pretty phenomenal trait. It does go really hard at 5 stars with that nice HP boost in behind everything. That's a lot of stat boosts at 15%. However, that's a long road to get there and very expensive. I feel, and I have used Dantalion a lot, that his trait does a perfectly fine job at 1 star. There's nothing wrong with leveling him up and getting him all the way up to 3 stars if you like. That's a great breakpoint. However, Dantalion for me is a 1-star character who does an amazing job. He's inexpensive and cheap and easy to use. And so I love having him 1 star and just keeping him that way keeps things simple. So I rank him a tier 5 character as far as his shard farm priority, and I'd suggest keeping him at 1 star. Up next is our girl Edda. Edda's trait is catching fire. Edda performs an assisting attack against all enemies within 4 tiles of herself, dealing 30% physical damage. This skill can be used 1 time per round. Now at 2 stars, we see that she gets an attack boost of 6%, already making this trait much better. But past that, everything else stays the same. And then at 3 stars, now she is able to attack all enemies within 4 tiles of herself up to 2 times per round. So that's a nice little boost at 3 stars. Definitely a great breakpoint doing it 2 times. And then at 4 stars, her attack is increased by 12%. And then the rest of the trait remains the same. And then at 5 stars, we're still getting that at 12% attack. However, now it's all enemies within 5 tiles, and she's dealing 40% physical damage instead of 30, but still only 2 times per round. So Edda's trait is it's okay at best. It's mid, just like her design and everything else. I get it. It's what she's meant to be, but it is mid. So for me, a great stopping point for Edda is 3 stars. That's where she breaks in that trait, and that's also fairly inexpensive. And so for me, I think she is a tier 4 character as far as shard priority, and you can stop at 3 stars. Up next is our girl Estra with her trait Sorceress Bane. Here it comes. It's a mouthful. She gains jump. At the start of the turn, she gains a magical shield up to 150% magical defense when attacking. 35% of the character's magical shield value is added to her physical attack. Before attacking, for each 1 energy the target is missing, damage dealt is increased by 4% up to 12%. When performing a non-instant single target attack, active attack, on a character with a magic attack greater than physical attack, she depletes 1 energy from the target and deals an additional physical damage equal to 30% of her physical attack. Whew, that is a lot. Now, at 2 stars, we see a nice little boost in 2 ways. Now the damage she is dealing is jumping from 5% to 15% instead of 4 to 12, so now it's 5 to 15. And then if the target has no energy, she is now dealing bonus 10% physical attack damage. Really good stuff there with that boost. At 3 stars, we see a couple boosts there as well, and that she's now dealing 6% to 18% bonus physical damage for each energy missing. And then if they have no energy, it's still the 10%. However, she is now depleting 2 energy from the target if their magic attack is higher than their physical attack, and dealing an additional 60% physical attack under that condition. So at 3 stars, she really breaks and gets a big boost out of her trait. At 4 stars, she is now dealing 8 to 24% bonus damage depending on how much energy is missing. And when they have no energy, she's now dealing 20% bonus damage instead of 10. Really big boost there. And then coming in at 5 stars, she is now able to deal 10 to 30% bonus damage depending on how much energy they are missing. Now, she's still dealing the bonus 20% if they have no energy. That does not change. However, she is depleting at 2 energy still and dealing the bonus 60% damage still. However, at the end, she's now getting a nice bonus of, at the end of the turn, she reduces a cooldown of a reaction skill and class skills by an additional turn. That is a lot. And so for her to get that cooldown of her class skills and reaction skills is pretty big, in my opinion. Really like to see that in her. It's a lot. I'd highly suggest pursuing it and getting it, because you want that cooldown. You want her to be able to use those abilities. And often, if she does become really energy hungry at that point, however, it's still really nice to have. I do think that 4 stars is a very healthy stopping point, but in my gut, I just thought, 5 stars is the way to go. Go all the way up to 5 stars, get that additional cooldown. It's a very valuable thing to have, additional cooldowns in bonus energy, so I always rate them very highly. And so yes, I think Estra is a tier 1 character, and I think you should pursue 5 stars on her. Up next is Faycal, and so Faycal comes in with his trait, Faycal's Obsession. This increases Faycal's attack and defense by 5%. When he deals damage, there's a 70% chance to inflict 1 random level 2 debuff for 2 turns. At 2 stars, he's now getting 10% attack and defense instead. However, we're still got the same odds of getting that debuff. And then at 3 stars, he's still getting the bonus 10% of his attack and defense, but now he has a 100% chance to inflict a level 2 debuff. Really nice stuff right there. And then at 4 stars, his attack and defense is boosted up to 15%, and then he's still got the 100% chance to get that level 2 debuff for 2 turns. Now at 5 stars, his trait goes hard, in my opinion. Faycal's attack and defense is still at 15%. However, when he gets that debuff, it's still 100%. He now gets, before he attacks, a bonus crit of 10% for each debuff the target has. If you play this game, you know that it's very easy to get a lot of debuffs on your enemies, and so Faycal immediately gains a lot of power and relevance in those fights where you're putting tons of debuffs on your opponents, basically guaranteeing his crits all day, every day. Absolutely massive. I love him paired with Kvare and Dantalion. I just see some pretty bonkers things. You just set him up with the alert and let people walk into it. It's just a ton of fun. And his stocks are only rising with SP and Inanna right on the horizon as of the recording of this video. So Faycal, for me, is a very powerful, underrated character at 5 stars. So for me, I would rate him a tier 1 character at 5 stars. If you like him, you want him, you're running him, get him there. It's worth it. Up next is our girl Flavia with her trait Abundance. At the start of the battle, it turns all tiles within 2 tiles of the character into flower fields, lasting for 2 turns. At the start of the battle, she summons 1 Thorn of Flora, and up to 1 Plant Buddy is allowed at a time. Plant Buddy inherits 100% bonus attack and defense and 120% basic HP from the character. When Flavia is present, Plant Buddy has their attack and defense increased to 10%, and allies on Flower Field gain damage reduction 1. Now at 2 stars, we see a small boost in that allies on the Flower Field, her Plant Buddy has attack and defense of 15% boost, and allies on the Flower Field now gain damage 1 and damage reduction 1. So we see a nice little boost in that. And then at 3 stars, we see that Plant Buddy is still getting that 15%. However, the plant receives double the effect of the damage and damage reduction series buffs when on the grass that Flavia creates. So that's a really nice big buff there at 3 stars, a decent breakpoint. And then at 4 stars, we see that now her Plant Buddy has their attack and defense increased by 25% instead of 15%. And then we're getting a damage reduction 2 on those grassy tiles instead of a damage reduction 1. And then coming in at 5 stars, we see that her Plant Buddy has her attack still boosted by 25% on that grassy tile. However, we're now getting damage 2 and damage reduction 2 for all allies on that grassy tile. And then her Flower Field takes 20% more damage when attacked on Flavia and Plant Buddy. So enemies on the grass, sorry, I kind of misread that, now take 20% more damage when on the grass at 5 stars. That's a pretty good deal. And it does a lot, I suppose, in a team. I don't know. It's tough. You tell me what you think. We all have opinions on it. For me, that's a lot. That's a high price at 5 stars to really get not a lot. I mean, I don't think it's the best in the world as far as traits go. So for me, I think that Flavia is a 3-star character, and I rank her tier 3 as far as her shard priority. Up next is our girl Garcia, coming in with her trait Executioner. At the start of turn, Garcia gains 1 stack of rotational acceleration, up to 6 stacks. When reaching 3 stacks, it increases her crit by 15%. And rotation acceleration is a 4% boost to her attack and defense per stack. At 2 stars, she starts the turn. Garcia gets 1 stack rotational acceleration, that's the same, up to 6 stacks, the same, and then when reaching 3 stacks, now she's getting a 30% boost to her crit, and at the start of the battle, she's now getting a bonus or stack of rotational acceleration. So that's a pretty decent boost at 2 stars. At 3 stars, now she can get her rotational accelerations up to 9 stacks. When reaching 3, it's still 30%, but when reaching 6 stacks, her crit damage is increased by 15%. That's the next change in 3 stars. Now coming in at 4 stars. When she reaches 3 stacks, it's the same at 30% crit, but at 6 stacks, now we're getting 30% crit damage. And at the start of the battle, she gains 2 stacks of rotational acceleration instead of just the 1. And then at 5 stars, her max stacks still stay at 9. She still gets the 30% crit, and at 6 stacks, she's getting that 30% crit damage. However, she can now ignore enemies block at 9 stacks and 40% of their defense. At the start of battle, she's still getting those 2 stacks. So she's getting armor piercing basically when she's ignoring that defense with that 9 stacks at a 5-star trait. Now, it's really expensive to go up there and get that 5-star trait, and ignoring defense is a very important stat. However, I think it's really, really expensive. I just don't think it's worth it, in my opinion. I think a great break point is to take that 30% bonus and then those 2 stacks at the start of the battle and just call it a day and walk away. And so for me, that 30% crit damage bonus is where I would stop at 4 stars, making her a tier 1 character as far as shard priority if you're using her, but I would stop at 4 stars. Up next is our girl Gloria with her trait Flag of Justice. At 1 star, increases Gloria's attack by 5%. When she loses flag waving aura, she gains potential burst for 2 turns. At the start of the battle, Gloria will auto use Longinus flag waving, which grants flag waving aura. So there's a lot to unpack there. That flag waving aura increases her attack and defense of all allies in their 3 tiles by 12%. And then, of course, that potential burst is an attack boost of 20% and a defense boost of 40%. And then she becomes immune to attribute debuffs. So really good stuff there with those 2 things. At 2 stars, Gloria is now getting a 10% boost to her attack, and everything else stays the same. At 3 stars, her attacks boost up to 15%. Everything else stays the same, with the exception of that her movement is increased by 2 tiles. And then at 4 stars, she's now getting an attack boost of 20%, and everything else stays the same. And at 5 stars, Gloria's attack still boosted up to 20%. However, when she gains that potential burst, when she loses that flag waving aura, basically gains that potential burst, she now is ignoring 50% of targets' defense when she hits them. So really nice. She gets a nice movement that comes in at 3 stars. That's a great break point. However, at 5 stars, she's getting that ignored defense. Really, really big on her. She's got a lot of AoE So that's why I think that ignore defense is massive, more so than it is on, say, Garcia. I think that it is something you absolutely want because her ability to deal damage is huge in my opinion. And so for that reason, I think Gloria is a tier 1 character as far as priority, and you should get her to 5 stars. Up next is Guzman with his trait Undead Corpse. Guzman becomes immune to no resolve. He possesses toughness, and when injured, his attack is increased by 5%. When dying, his attack is additionally increased by 10%. And when defeated, Guzman transforms into a corpse with a 100% decrease to defense. This lasts until the end of the battle and can be activated up to 1 time per battle. Now at 2 stars, Guzman only changes slightly. He now gets a 7% boost to his attack when injured, and then a 15% boost to his attack when dying. After that, at 3 stars, he is now only losing 80% of his defense when he turns into a corpse, and then nothing else changes. And then at 4 stars, he is gaining a 10% boost to attack when injured, a 20% boost to attack when dying, and nothing else changes. When defeated at 5 stars, Guzman transforms into a corpse with 50% decreased defense. And that is the only change. For me, this is not enough. His trait needs some love and a buff because it doesn't do anything to make me want to level it up. So for me, Guzman is a tier 5 character in Shard priority and is a 1-star character. Up next is Hasna, the waifu queen, and her trait is Lingering Fragrance. Hasna is immune to blind. Her magic attack is increased by 3%, and she inflicts hidden fragrance on all enemies within 3 tiles of her at the end of her turn, which lasts for 1 turn. Enemies with hidden fragrance within 3 tiles around her have their attack and defense decreased by 8%, and their chance of being critically hit by 15%. I can't stress this enough. That is a phenomenal trait in that she's making her enemies more susceptible to critical hits just for being around them. Really, really cool feature right there. And of course, dropping their attack and defense along the way. But wow, absolutely love that. Now, at 2 stars, all we see is a nice boost to her magic attack going up to 6% instead of 3. And then at 3 stars, we see that her magic attack is boosted further at 9%. However, now it's all enemies within 4 tiles of her instead of 3. And we're now reducing their attack and defense by 12% instead of 8. And so that is a nice break at 3 stars where we're getting a good boost in her trait. Now at 4 stars, her magic attack is increased to 12% instead of the 9. However, everything else remains the same. Now at 5 stars, we see that her magic attack is boosted up to 15% now instead, and all enemies within 5 tiles of her are now inflicted with hidden fragrance. That's a massive range. And now the hidden fragrance lasts for 2 turns instead of 1. That's a big difference too at 5 stars. This also is boosted in their debuff in that now their attack and defense is decreased by 15% instead of 12. But they're still getting that 12% chance to be critically hit. These are all pretty big buffs. I absolutely think it's big, it's massive, it's great. That range is relevant. I love increasing the range. I think that is a huge asset in this game. The bigger you can make your range, the better your characters are. The easier it is to do the damage and stay out of the way of harm. I absolutely love it. So for me, I rate that high. I think it has a lot of value. So Hasna for me is a tier 2 character as far as Shard Farm urgency, but I would suggest you getting her to 5 stars if possible and interested. Up next is our girl Homa with her trait Best Partner. Homa ignores block and her physical attack is increased by 5%. After Homa or her ally or the ally below is performs a single target attack, Bolor will be called to attack again, dealing 20% of Homa's physical damage as, yeah, physical damage. Homa's physical attack as physical damage, sorry. But yes, and so not to be confusing in all this, but you can put Bolor on targets, on allies, and then they're buffed with Bolor. And whoever's has Bolor will do bonus damage based on, you know, her physical attack. So yes, at 2 stars, we see only a slight change, and that now Bolor will come in with that extra attack, dealing 30% of Homa's physical attack as physical damage. So a small boost, but it's still there. Now at 3 stars, this is a great breakpoint because now she's getting that physical attack boost to 12% instead of 5. So it's a pretty decent jump right there. And then when she is healthy, as in Homa is healthy, her movement is increased by 1. Really good stuff right there, getting that bonus movement. Now at 4 stars, we now see that movement and everything else stays the same. However, Bolor is doing 40% bonus damage of Homa's physical attack. 40% of Homa's physical attack is bonus damage instead of the 30. So a decent boost there. Then coming in at 5 stars, she is now getting a physical attack boost of 20%. That's big. And then when she's healthy, you're still getting that 1 move. However, we are now, when Bolor strikes and hits, we are now stealing 2 random buffs and 1 energy for Homa. So whoever's getting smacked by that Bolor, she's using Bolor to steal 2 buffs and 1 energy. That's absolutely massive. Anytime you get energy, it's big. If you're taking energy away from opponents and stopping them from utilizing their own energy, that's double as big, doubly good, if you will. And so I rate that very, very highly. In my opinion, Homa is a tier 0.5 character as far as shard farm priority, and she comes in at 5 stars. Next is our boy Iggy with his trait Gray Wolf. Iggy possesses jump and 77% bonus attack. The attack boost effect of this trait is doubled when attacking from a highland position, so making it 14%. At 2 stars, that's boosted up to 10%, making it 20 at highland position. At 3 stars, he is now getting jump and climb, and his attack is boosted to 12%, which makes it 24 at highland. And then 4 stars, he is now doing 16%, which is 32 at highland, which is a nice big attack boost with a little bit of a niche kind of, you know, setting to kind of create. It's not easy to get highland advantage. You know, there's ways to do it, don't get me wrong, and do it reliably, but you're working for it. At 5 stars, he is now getting 16% still, but when he's attacking from that highland position, he is now getting armor piercing in his attacks. So that's a really big boost with that armor piercing. Makes a big difference in him. And so I would highly suggest, if you're using Iggy and you like him, to make sure you get him up to 5 stars. If you're using Iggy and he's not 5 stars, he is missing on a lot of damage because that armor piercing is massive. So for me, Iggy is a tier 2 character that I would suggest getting to 5 stars. Please remember, this doesn't mean that Iggy is the best character in the game. This is not rating him so much as rating what his trait does for him. Just bear that in mind. If you love Iggy, more power to you. I feel you. Up next is our girl Inanna with her trait Pearl of Iria. Inanna summons 1 guard of the princess. At the end of the turn, she heals 1 ally with the lowest HP percentage within 3 tiles of herself for 20% of her magic attack and grants them 1 random level 1 buff for 2 turns. At 2 stars, that all stays the same. She is now granting the 1 level 2 buff for 2 turns instead of 1 level 1 buff. So decent change there at 2 stars. Now coming in at 3 stars, she is now targeting 2 allies with the lowest HP within 3 tiles of herself instead of 1, but still giving them the same amount of HP, the 20% magic attack, and 1 level 2 buff. Now at 4 stars, she is now targeting 2 allies within 4 tiles of herself instead of 3, and she's healing them for 25% of her magic attack instead of 20, still giving the same amount of buffs. And then at 5 stars, at the start of turn, Inanna summons one guard of the princess, still the same, but at the end of the turn, 2 allies within 4 tiles, 25%, and then one random level 2 buff for 2 turns. However, the guard of the princess attack and defense is increased by 15%. The skill summon guard of the princess can be used an additional 2 times per battle. This is a very niche 5-star trait, and honestly probably one of the worst in my opinion, but if you like it and you love it, there's nothing wrong with that. For me, Inanna does not need 5 stars. I think that you are perfectly fine stopping at 3 stars. So I rate her a tier 1 character as far as that priority shard farming, but you can stop at 3 stars. I think it's really big to get that bonus ally with the heals and that level 2 buff. So get her up to 3 stars, but tier 1 in priority. Up next is SP Inanna, also known as Inanna Wake Up. She is coming in with her trait Free Will. Bear in mind this is a translation, so work with me. I'm going to read it as it actually is and used in the game in the English version, but you'll have a translation on your screen, so I'm sorry in advance. Inanna gets a nice buff each turn that's stacked called Free Will. When she has Free Will, she gets a bonus of 1 movement. At the beginning of battle, she gets 6 stacks of Free Will and 2 stacks at the end of each turn. She additionally gets an ability, it's an instant called Call of Freedom. This costs 8 stacks of Free Will and 2 energy. It is an instant single target healing ability that heals for 30% of her physical attack and grants Act Again, and it can only be triggered once per round. This is a massive trait right here already, just for that, and that Act Again is ranged. Regardless, at 2 stars, she is now getting an attack and defense boost of 10%. Big change from 0 to 10. She is also now gaining 8 stacks of Free Will at the beginning of battle. That's massive. Now she can cast Act Again right out the gate, no thoughts about it. Very big. At 3 stars, it only gets better. It increases her attack and defense by 15% now, which is a big boost again. And when she has Free Will, she can now get 2 bonus movement instead of 1. That's also big. And her single target Call of Freedom now heals for 90% of her physical attack. That's massive. And moreover, she's granting damage 2 and damage resistance 2, lasting for 2 rounds. So 3 stars is definitely a very strong breakpoint, but it only gets better. At 4 stars, now her attack and defense is increased by 20%. That is huge. Also, she is now gaining 3 stacks of Free Will at the end of each turn, so that's also big. And now her Freedom Pose is now Freedom Pose 2, or Call of Freedom 2, not abiding by the translation. And not only is it giving an Act Again, but it's also granting 2 energy to the target. That is massive. So 4 stars is even better breakpoint. Here comes 5 stars. This increases her attack and defense by 25%. That is huge. That is a huge stat boost right there. Now, after that, everything else stays the same, with the exception of her Call of Freedom. When she casts it on a target, she is no longer just granting them Act Again 2 energy, 2 damage resistance 2, and damage up to. She's now also granting herself that 2. So when she casts Call of Freedom and they're getting the Act Again, the 2 energy, damage 2 up, and damage reduction 2 up, she is also benefiting from all of those things. That is huge. So it's 2 Act Agains in 1 turn at 5 stars, and 25% of her attribute attribute is being buffed. That is absolutely massive. This is a huge, strong trait that only gets better each level, and in a huge way. This is power creep times 900. So for me, SP Inanna is a tier 0 character as far as shard farm priority, and she comes in at 5 stars. Up next is Kvare. Kvare comes in with his trait, Roster. So Roster increases his HP and magic attack by 3%. He gains an additional skill, Roster. This is an instant that inflicts Roster and life loss equal to 30% of the character's magical attack on enemies without Roster for 3 turns. So basically, if they have Roster, they can't get it again, is what that reads as. Can be used up to 1 time per round. When removing Roster from a target, it increases the character's attack and defense by 5% up to 20%, lasting until the end of battle. It cannot be dispelled or immunized. At the end of the turn, it casts Roster skill on the closest enemy without Roster within 5 tiles of the character. And so Roster is a pretty big ability within itself, in that it inflicts 2 level 2 debuffs on a target for 2 turns. And then when Roster ends, or the target is attacked and enters the dying state, Kvare immediately summons an assassin to attack the character, dealing 100% of his magic attack as piercing damage. Then removes Roster. That is bonkers. It is an absolutely massive, massive skill in this, trait. And so he is absolutely phenomenal. Now, coming in at 2 stars, we see that he now gets an HP and magic attack boost of 6%. That's a pretty big boost right there, and it jumps up. Otherwise, there's no changes in this trait. Coming up to 3 stars, we see that his HP and magic attack are increased by 9%. Moreover, his life loss value is increased up to 40% of the character's magic attack on enemies without Roster. So that life loss is coming at 40% instead of 30%. And then when he uses Roster for the first time each round, he refunds 1 energy. So that's a big change and a great breakpoint, because now he's getting energy back for casting Roster at the beginning of each round. So that's an instant ability once again. Really good stuff there at 3 stars. And then coming in at 4 stars, we see that his HP and magic attack is increased to 12%. And then he is now inflicting that life loss of 50% of his magic attack on enemies without Roster. So when he inflicts that Roster, they get that life loss of 50% of his magic attack. It is absolutely massive. Everything else stays the same though. And then at 5 stars, he now gets an HP and magic attack increase of 15%. And then his life loss inflicted with Roster is now 60% of his magic attack, which is huge. And it can be used 2 times per round. And it refunds the consumed energy of the first time each turn when using the skill. That is amazing. That is very powerful. Great stuff right there. Everything else stays the same. This trait is very, very strong in a lot of ways. But, and I know this is probably going to rub people the wrong way, I don't think he needs 5 star. The energy return is nice. Being able to cast Roster more than 1 time is absolutely wonderful. But I think Kvare does his job and does it well at 1 star. And so for me, when I'm rating him, I think that he is a 1 star character that is a tier 5 as far as shard farming priority. That is not an insult to Kvare. Clearly, he gets better as you level up his trait, but I really think that his trait is so powerful and great that it doesn't need to be leveled up. At level 1, it does a ton. Of course, it gets better as you do, but it is super duper strong as it is out the gate at 1 star. So that is how I see Kvare. Tier 5, 1 star. Bonkers character. Up next is Layla with her trait Iris Vanguard. This increases her magic defense to 15% by 15%, and then it grants her a preempt that does 40% physical damage and can be triggered 2 times per round. She gains a block and can also block magical attacks, which is huge. And she performs that preempt on enemies that are attacking from the front or side within 2 tiles of the character before they actively attack, of course. And at the end of the turn, if the character is within an enemy's threat range, she then gains Iris Vanguard. And Iris Vanguard is a nice buff to her damage by 40%. And then, of course, she then ignores 20% of their defense. It's pretty big. Now, at 2 stars, we don't see any changes with the exception of that now she can preempt 4 times per round instead of just 2. That is a big change, a big shift for 1-star value. And then at 3 stars, it's all same, but instead of 2 tiles range, she now has 3 tiles. So that's a big shift too, but the rest of the trait stays the exact same. And then at 4 stars, we see that her magic defense is increased by 25%. That's a lot. And then she's now done 60% physical damage to enemies within 3 tiles. And it can be triggered up to 6 times per turn. This is an absolutely massive breakpoint right here for Layla. This trait goes bonkers at 4 stars. And then at 5 stars, we still have the same magical defense, the same physical damage, same 3 tiles, and up to 6 times. But at the start of turn, she gains 1 energy. That is the difference there that we see. And that is the only difference that we see at 5 stars. So for me, this is a character that does not need to be 5 stars at all whatsoever. Gaining that energy is big. I do value energy highly, but the value you get out of your 4-star rating is massive. And so I think that is more than enough. So for me, I'm going to suggest Layla as a tier 0 as far as shard farming, but stopping at 4 stars. Up next is Leonide with his trait Fearless Charge. Before an attack or charge, for each tile Leonide traversed, his damage increases by 4% and he ignores 6% defense of the target. After he is actively attacks with a skill other than an instant, the effect ends and he gains charge damage reduction, and this decreases the damage taken by 20% for 1 turn, and then he has a 1-turn cooldown. That 1-turn cooldown on this trait is killer in my opinion. It is very much outdated, but it is what it is. At 2 stars, we see a shift in that instead of increasing his damage by 4%, now it's by 6%, but we're still ignoring 6% of the damage. The rest of the trait is the same. At 3 stars, we are now ignoring 8% of the target's defense, and that damage and mitigation or reduction is increased to 30% instead of 20%, and for 2 turns instead of 1. But the trait still has a 1-turn cooldown. At 4 stars, now he is doing increased 8% damage per tile traverse, and still ignoring the 8% defense per tile traverse. The rest of the trait stays the same. And then at 5 stars, he is now ignoring 10% of the target's defense per tile traversed, and he is now also decreasing that damage taken by 30% still. However, if no less than 5 tiles are traversed, he then ignores block and dodge of the target. That's the only change is there. He still has the 1-turn cooldown on this trait, which is killer in my opinion. So when I'm reading this, I think an absolute good break point for me is 3 stars, where he gets that 8% to ignoring damage and that 30% boost to his damage reduction. So I think that's a really good stopping point, but it doesn't, his trait's not great, so it's a low priority in his farming. I don't think he absolutely needs it to do his job. So I think Leonide is a tier 4 character as far as shard farm priority and comes in at 3 stars. Up next is LillyWill with her trait Valtar Guardian, and so she comes in with this trait at 1 stars. Lily possesses jump. She gains a 5% bonus to attack and ignores assisting cover when attacking from a highland position. A fairly niche trait, but decent little attack boost. At 2 stars, she then gets a 10% boost to her attack instead of 5, so that's nice. And then at 3 stars, nothing changes with the exception that she gets a 30% bonus crit when attacking from Highland. That is a nice bonus crit, but attacking from Highland is not always to achieve. She does have an ability that gives it outright, so that should be noted. And then at 4 stars, her attack is boosted to 15% instead of 10, but the rest of the trait remains the same. And then coming in at 5 stars, LillyWill possesses jump. She gains 15% bonus attack still, ignores the cover still, and gets the 30% crit. But all skill cooldowns are reduced by 1 when attacking from a Highland position. That's pretty big for a trait. And so she really pops off and does a lot with her 5 skill trait. Man, that is expensive to get it. And so for me, I think she's a low priority on the shard farm, because while her 5-star trait is absolutely wonderful and does a lot for her, I don't think it's so much so that it's game breaking. I do think that's where she benefits from her trait. If you're gonna farm it, I'd stop right there at 5 stars in my opinion, but that's mega expensive. So she is a tier 2 character at 5 stars in my opinion. Up next is our boy Lutfi with his trait Smiling Mask. At the start of the turn, he locks onto 3 random enemies within 3 tiles of himself and removes their alert status. For each debuff inflicted on the target before attacking, it increases his attack by 5% up to 20%. After casting a support debuff skill, to the enemy, for each debuff the target has, it inflicts life loss equal to 5% physical attack up to 15% physical attack, and can be triggered up to 4 times per round. That is a lot, and that is absolutely great. His trait is amazing. At 2 stars, we see a small difference in that now he is targeting those 3 enemies within 4 tiles instead of 3. And then at 3 stars, we see a few changes. At 3 stars, we see he gets a general attack boost of 5%. That's just period dot. And then now his planning, which is what he gets from his, his skills, is reduced from 3 turns down to 2 turns instead. And then that attack boost that he's getting from hitting those enemies with debuffs is increased from 5 up to 30% instead of 20%. So that's a big change. And then also he is now triggering that life loss bonus damage, I should say, from 5% up to 25% physical attack instead of 15. So at 3 stars, there is a tremendous amount of bonuses unlocked, and it's a great break point for Lutfi. Now looking ahead at 4 stars, he is now locking onto 4 random enemies within 6 tiles of the character. So that's a big jump from 3 random enemies within 4 tiles to now 4 enemies within 6 tiles. And then additionally, he is now inflicting 1 level 2 debuff. So that's a really nice change right there. Really glad to see it. Good things unlocked there with that. Now at 5 stars, we see his overall attack increased up to 10% instead of that 5. So that's pretty nice. We're glad to see it. And then, of course, that planning duration is reduced down to 1 turn now instead of 2. That's absolutely massive. It's a really, really big deal. That means he's able to use his 2 key abilities repeatedly. Really big deal. Checkmate and decoy and whatnot. So really, really good stuff there. And then at the end of the turn, he's additionally recovering 1 energy. Massive. And then for each debuff, now his attack's going from 5 to 40%, also massive, instead of that 30%. And then that life loss down below, we're getting it up to 35% max on those life losses instead of 25%. So really good stuff. A lot gained out of his trait. especially at 5 stars. We get a breakpoint at 3, but man, at 5 stars, it's just so good. He's getting that energy. He's getting so many different things. And then that planning being reduced down to 1 turn is the biggest component of that, in my opinion. And of course, all the damage he's getting is absolutely massive too. So with all of that said, Lutfi, for me, is a tier 0 character that you absolutely want to get to 5 stars as soon as possible. Up next is Luvata with her trait Firebird in Nirvana. This increases her magic attack by 5%, and when dealing critical damage, it inflicts 1 stack of ignition on the target, lasting for 2 turns. It can be triggered 1 time per round, and at the start of battle, she grants all allies burning tile immunity, so they don't get hurt by burning tiles, they walk over them, don't get scorched, blah blah blah, the whole 9. And then of course, ignition is life loss, but it's equal to 25% of the caster's physical and magical attack, just so you know. Now at 2 stars, we see a boost to her magical attack up to 10%, and then when she's doing crit and all that, it's still the same, but now it can be triggered up to 2 times per round. And then after casting a fire skill, the character gains crit 1 for 2 turns. So we see a pretty big shift and change at 2 stars. Really, really good stuff right there. And then coming in at 3 stars, we see that she now is dealing crit damage and inflicts that ignition still, but she's now getting crit 2 for casting those fire skills, which is really, really nice instead of that crit 1. And then coming in at 4 stars, her magic attack is increased to 15% instead of 10. And she can get that ignition triggered up to 3 times per round now instead of just 2. And she's now getting crit 2 and crit damage 1 on top of that for casting those fire skills. So that's a nice change. But at 5 stars, she gets a magic attack boost of 20%, which is huge. Her ignition can be triggered up to 4 times per round now instead of just 3. And then after casting that fire skill, she is now gaining crit 3 and crit damage 3 for 2 turns. Whoa, that's a huge change. From crit damage 1 to crit damage 3. Absolutely massive. That's a 45% boost to her crit damage, and she's getting a 45% boost to her crits. That's big. This 5-star goes hard and in a big way as far as damage. So for me, I think that Luvata is a tier 0 character as far as shard farm priority, because she really, really benefits from her 5-star trait, and I think you absolutely need to get her to 5-star on that beautiful Luvata. Up next is Magnus with his trait Experienced General. Magnus decreases the attack and defense of all allies within 3 tiles of himself by 8%. And when attacking, he is granted a physical attack equal to 20% of his physical defense. Pretty decent trait right there. Like it a lot. At 2 stars, we see that there is a boost to his physical attack where it's now 30% of his physical defense, but nothing else changes. And then at 3 stars, now he's decreasing the attack defense of enemies by 12% just for being near them within that 3 tile range. And then at 4 stars, Magnus is now decreasing still at the 12% within 3 tiles, but he is now getting 40% bonus attack from his physical defense. So that's a decent little boost right there of 10%. And then at 5 stars, Mr. Magnus comes in, and all enemies within 4 tiles now instead of 3 are now losing 15% of their attack and defense. And then when he's attacking, we still get that same 40% boost. For me, that is not the best trait in the world. It's not doing a ton for him, but it's still pretty good and deserves some note and recognition. And so I rank him a tier 3 character, but you should stop at 3 stars in my opinion. Up next is Mytha with her trait Shield of Convallaria. Mytha possesses block. Her damage taken is decreased by 8%, and at the end of the turn, she heals the ally with the lowest HP percentage in battle by restoring 20% of their HP. So that's no matter where they are on the battlefield, and for 20% of their HP, it's a very strong trait. Really good stuff here with Mytha. At 2 stars, her damage taken is reduced by 12% instead of 8, but the rest of the trait remains the same. And at 3 stars, now the damage taken is reduced by 15%, but the rest of the trait remains the same. And then at 4 stars, we see a big shift, and that she's now able to heal 2 allies with the lowest HP on the battlefield, no matter where they are, for that 20%. Really, really nice big breakpoint, in my opinion, because now she's hitting 2 of them. And then at 5 stars, she's reducing the damage taken by 20% instead of 15%, but the rest of the trait remains the same. And so, for me, Mytha has a phenomenal trait that's really good, and I would say it's not absolutely necessary to go for it, though. While it's really powerful, I think she does a lot good at 1 star, 2 star, and so on, and doesn't absolutely need to be leveled up higher. So, Mytha comes in as a tier 4 as far as shard farming priority, but if you are farming her up and you're interested, I think 4 stars is a great stopping point for her. Up next is our boy Miguel. He comes in with his trait Swiftness. Swiftness increases Miguel's attack by 5%. He can jump over allies, enemies, and neutral characters and items without consuming movement. The effect can be activated 1 time per round. Definitely a very cool and unique trait right there. At 2 stars, his attack is increased by 10%, and he can now jump over the various objects, terrain, people 2 times per round. At 3 stars, we don't see any shift in the trait, with the exception of when he does jump over something, someone, somewhere, he is now getting 1 energy per round for doing so. That is very nice. And then at 4 stars, he has now increased his attack by 15%, and he is now able to jump 3 times per round. And so that's another nice little buff that he can do 3 times. I don't know you necessarily want to jump over things 3 times within a single round, but hey, he can do it. And then at 5 stars, his attack's still at 15%, and he still can jump 3 times, but now when he jumps over something, he is able to inflict Scorch. And I'm going to read this verbatim. After jumping, before using a skill, he inflicts Scorch on the target for each instance of physical damage dealt. That's very misleading. It says physical damage each instance very clearly. However, that is not the case. Unfortunately, not all instances of damage that Miguel does inflict Scorch. I don't know if this is bugged or not, but it breaks my heart. I have Miguel at 5 stars. I've tested this. I've used it. I've gone everywhere. You jump over somebody and you use your brutal kick. Yep, you're going to inflict Scorch. It's nice. But you use your basic attack, and it literally says it's a physical AoE. It does not inflict Scorch. It says physical. It says AoE, but does not inflict Scorch. And so that's a little bit heartbreaking right there. Mourner works, brutal attack works, other things do not. And so this is not as great as it should be, and I would like it to be. And so I have to suggest that he only goes up to 3 stars, because that's a good break point where you're getting that energy. And if you are using Miguel, it does do a lot for him. So I think he is a tier 1 character that you should stop at 3 stars, at least until they fix his trait, which it may just be bugged. Who knows? Up next is our girl Momo with her trait Doom Resonance. All enemies within 3 tiles of Momo take 15% more damage over time. At the end of Momo's turn, she gains 2 stacks of Repulsion Barrier up to 5 stacks with a 2-turn cooldown. Repulsion Barrier is a buff that gains immunity to knockback, or gives her immunity to knockback, and each stack increases her attack by 2%. She's able to block physical attacks and reduces the damage taken by 50%. And then she loses 1 stack for each instance of damage that she has taken. It cannot be immunized or dispelled. This is a great trait right here. Now at 2 stars, we see that that boost to damage over time is enhanced to 20% instead of 15%. So that's really, really nice. And then at 3 stars, we see a big breaking point right here, and that all enemies in 3 tiles gain that 20% still. However, she now is getting a extra stack of Repulsion Berry at the start of the battle for free, and there's no cooldown reduction on the Repulsion Berry. So at 3 stars, gets free Repulsion Berry stack, no cooldown on it. Absolutely big. And then at 4 stars, now she's starting battle with 2 stacks of Repulsion Berry instead of 1, and enemies are taking 25% more damage over time. That's phenomenal. And then coming in at 5 stars, now it's all enemies within 4 tiles instead of 3. 4 tiles take 35% more damage over time instead of the 25. And she is starting battle with 3 stacks of Repulsion Barrier instead of 2. This is massive. Momo's trait is absolutely phenomenal because if you know, you know. The way things are going in the game, damage over time is the way to go. Damage over time does include infection, life loss, and so on. Ignition, you name it. And a lot of the most relevant characters that are doing great things right now, like we just got Lutfi, who inflicts damage over time. So Momo is becoming more and more relevant as the game progresses forward, as things are now. So for me, her trait is massive in what it does for your gameplay. Momo is a tier 0.5 character as far as shard farm priority, and 5 stars in my opinion. Up next is Nergal with his trait Luxite Gauntlet. Nergal possesses block, and at the end of the turn, he gains a shield charge. After performing a block, he gains bayonet charge. And so bayonet charge increases attack by 10%, with the effect doubled against targets with Hangman's Mark. So, and then of course, actively attacking reduces all stacks. And then of course, that shield charge is an enhanced block and damage reduction. And it's limited to 2 stacks, I believe. Moving on, at 2 stars, Nergal has that block still, of course. And then at the end of his turn, he gains 2 charges of shield charge instead of just the 1. At 3 stars, he now gets powerful shield charge up to 2 stacks instead of just regular shield charge. And that powerful shield charge changes to his block is a 100% block. And then performing that block reduces damage taken by 15% for each stack, which of course is 2, so it's 30. And then of course, anytime he takes that physical damage, it removes 1 stack. Moving forward, at 4 stars, we really don't see any changes in Nergal's ability. He now can have, only thing different is bayonet charge stack up to 2 times instead of just 1. That is not great. And then at 5 stars, Nergal possesses that block still, of course. He gets a powerful shield charge up to 2, the bayonet shield charge up to 2, and then the first block of each turn decreases the cooldown of all skills by 1 turn. That part is nice, with the exception of that he has to take a hit in order to do it. So Nergal's trait is honestly lackluster, in my opinion. It doesn't do a lot for him. I don't think it's overly great. I think his breakpoint's 3 stars, and I'm being generous here. I'm trying to really look at it. I've used Nergal quite a bit, and I just want him to do more. He does do it for me. So, for me, Nergal is a tier 4 character as far as shard farm priority, and I would stop at 3 stars. Up next is LillyWill with her trait Mysterious Siren. LillyWill possesses jump, and she gains a 6% bonus attack. She also gains Veil at the start of the round, which has a 3-turn cooldown. And so Veil reduces the damage taken from AoE attacks by 99%. It's absolutely phenomenal. Very, very cool, powerful trait right there with that. However, at 2 stars, we see that her bonus damage is increased to 8% from 6, and we see no other changes. And at 3 stars, that bonus attack is up to 10% from 8, but it reduces the cooldown of her Veil by down to 2 turns instead of 3. That's nice. And then at 4 stars, LillyWill possesses jump. She gets that bonus attack at 12% instead of 10, but we still have that 2-turn cooldown on the Veil. And then at 5 stars, we see that she gets that bonus attack up to 15%, and the Veil has a cooldown of 1 turn instead of 2. So her trait is very, very good all on its own and right out the gate. Its 5-star is not worth it in my opinion, but to each their own. If you want it, you're after it, there's nothing wrong with that. I suggest that LillyWill is a tier 5 character in Shard Farm priority, and that you stop at 1 star because she gets it all right there with it. Up next is Nungall with her trait Luxite Crossbow. Nungall changes Nungall's physical damage dealt into magical damage. For each 1 tile between her and the target, the distance for adjacent tiles counts as 0, so basically right next to her. Damage is increased from 3% up to 30%, so 10 tiles away, 30%. If Nungall does not move before attacking, it increases her range by 1. That's a pretty great trait right there within itself, and does a lot of really good things in my opinion. At 2 stars, Nungall now, for each 1 tile between her target, is boosting her damage by 4% up to 40%. That is the only change. At 3 stars, now we're getting bonus 15% to crit. Just outright. Period dot. But the rest of the trait remains the same. And then at 4 stars, now we're increasing damage by 5% up to 45% for each tile away from her that she's shooting, but that is the only change. And then at 5 stars, she is now dealing the same amount of damage, the same amount of crit, but when attacking enemies outside of 5 tiles, she ignores the target's reaction, preempt, and or strike back skills. So that's really interesting. The change to ignore the reaction, the preempt, is pretty niche. Strike back's not really a concern when you're attacking outside of 5 tiles anyways. You know, there's only a few instances where that's the case. It just overall doesn't do anything. You know, if this ignored defense, it would be absolutely bonkers. But that's not what it does. And so her trait really isn't that strong in my opinion. I think a good, decent breakpoint is 4 stars. That's where I would stop. But do you, boo. If you want to do more, there's nothing wrong with it. So I suggest her to be a tier 4 character with Shard Farm priority and stopping at 3 stars. Up next is our girl Nydia, and she's coming in with her trait Seal of Dark Feather. So, Seal of Dark Feather, physical damage dealt is considered magical damage. At the start of the battle, she gains Armor of Ice for 3 turns. During the character's current turn, when basic attacks hit the targets with Black Feather, it triggers 1,000 Black Feathers and consumes the Black Feather from the basic attack target after attacking. Active basic attack inflicts 1 frostbite on the target for 1 turn. And add 10% magical attack and physical attack at the start of the turn and inflicts Black Feathers on the 2 closest enemies without Black Feathers within 4 tiles of the character. Man, the way they write these traits. Whew. Anyways, really good, powerful ability. Black Feather go boom when you hit them with basic attack. Long story, boring. Okay. At 2 stars, the only change we get in the trait is that now she's inflicting Black Feathers on the 2 closest enemies within 5 tiles. That's the only change there. At 3 stars, though, we see a couple things happen. We see that she now is able to add 20% to her magic and physical attack for attacking the 1,000 Black Feather. And then damage is increased by 10%. Also, the max range of her basic attacks is increased by 1. That's pretty great. Moreover, we're now inflicting Black Feather on the 3 closest enemies instead of 2 within 5 tiles. So really good stuff right there. Really big breakpoint at 3 stars. Now at 4 stars, we see that we're going to add that 20% still, but the damage is increased by 20% of the Black Feathers, 1,000 Black Feathers. So that's a big boost in the damage. And we're inflicting Black Feather on those 3 closest enemies within 6 tiles now instead of 5 tiles. So that's another great change there at 4 stars. Then coming in at 5 stars, we're getting that ice armor for 3 turns. All that stuff is still the same, but now we're adding 30% of her magic attack to her physical attack, and we're now doing 1000 Black Feather damage increased by 30%. Her max range is increased by 2 tiles. Whew. And then at the start of turn, we're now inflicting Black Feather on the 4 closest enemies within 6 tiles. So a lot of really good changes right there. And then when actively using a basic attack, the character recovers 1 energy and reduces all class skill cooldowns by 1 turn and can be triggered 1 time per round. So this trait already is phenomenal. Progressively gets better with each star level. But at 5 stars, it goes hard. It gets really, really good. And so for that reason, I think she is a tier 0 as far as shard farm priority, and you absolutely want her to be 5 stars. Up next is Pamina, and her trait, Unyielding Heroine. What an awesome unit, by the way. I just love this character. Anyways, her trait comes in with Ignores Block, increases her physical defense by 10%, and adds 20% of her physical defense to her attack. Upon entering battle, she gains Unyielding Heroine, which can be triggered 1 time per round. The character's defense is increased by 15% for each 1 enemy within 2 tiles, up to 30%. So 2 enemies recognized there. And then of course, Unyielding Heroine. When attacked by enemies within 2 tiles of the character, she deals a 90% physical AoE damage to all enemies within range. This generates 45% lifesteal, but for each additional target hit, the damage dealt is reduced by 10%, up to 30%. And this cannot be dispelled or immunized. So really good things right there. This character can absolutely mow things. So she stands there and takes the hits, and I love it. Moving on, at 2 stars, we don't see tremendous difference. We see that her physical defense gets a boost up to 15% from 10%, and then her Unyielding Heroine can be triggered up to 2 times per round instead of 1. Past that, there is no differences there. At 3 stars, she is now getting a physical defense boost of 20%, and her Unyielding Heroine can be triggered up to 3 times per round. That's really, really nice. Phenomenal change there, and a great breakpoint, honestly, at 3 stars. Moving on, at 4 stars, her physical defense is increased to 25%. She now is adding 30% of her physical defense to her physical attack. That's massive. She's still doing her Unyielding Heroine still can only be triggered up to 3 times per round, and everything else stays the same. Now at 5 stars, her physical defense is increased by 30%. Huge. And we still get that 30% defense to attack, but her Unyielding Heroine can be activated up to 4 times per round. That's a lot. When triggered, the character now dispels 1 debuff and recovers 1 energy. The character's defense is increased by 15% for each person around, up to 30%. That does not change. So we're getting a lot of energy. We're doing a lot. Does she need that energy? She goes crazy when she has it. I mean, it just looks bonkers. But I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I think the breakpoint is 3 stars. Getting up to 5 stars is a huge luxury that makes her absolutely phenomenal, and really helps her out. So it's easy to suggest 5 stars. But I just thought about this, and I really think that 3 stars is a great stopping point. So for me, she is a tier 0.5 on Shard Farm priority, but I think you're good at stopping at 3 stars. Understand 5 stars is pretty bonkers though, so it's an easy suggestion. I don't know, I was kind of fighting with myself, and I obviously still am. Regardless, 3, 5, whatever you choose, I'm putting 3 on the list. Great character, great trait. Up next is OG Rawiyah. She's coming in with her trait Bottoms Up. This increases Rawiyah's damage by 8%, and at the start of the turn or during a strike back, there is a 50% chance that she'll recover 30% of her lost HP and gain Tipsy. This can be activated 1 time per round. Tipsy increases her crit by 30% and reduces the damage taken by 10%, and it can be stacked. Tipsy is absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. At 2 stars, we are now getting a bonus to her damage of 12% from 8, and there's a 60% chance that will trigger that bottoms up, getting that drink on. At 3 stars, her damage is increased to 16%, and we now have a 70% chance of triggering that Tipsy, and we're recovering 40% of her lost HP instead of 30. That's a lot of HP. This is a phenomenal trait. I can't say it enough. Absolutely phenomenal. At 4 stars, her damage is increased by 25%. At the start of the turn, strike back, blah, 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 70% chance to trigger that Tipsy, 40% HP, that stays the same. And then at 5 stars, damage stays the same at 25%, still massive. But now we have an 80% chance of triggering that Tipsy, and it can be triggered up to 2 times per round. This is a phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal trait. Doing really big things. Triggering it 2 times per round is massive. With that said, I think that the breakpoint is 4 stars. Getting that 25% damage is all you need. It's a really steep, expensive grind to get her all the way up to 5 stars. And so I think she is a tier 2 as far as her shard farm priority. And I think you should stop at 4 stars for OG Rawiyah. Up next is Rawiyah Nostalgia, or SP Rawiyah as she's better known. One of my absolute favorite characters in the game. She is bonkers. She comes in with her trait Sunny Spirit. At 1 star, fatigue lasts until the start of the next 3 turns. Stamina stacks up to 10 times, and after hitting an AoE attack, she can act again and receives fatigue. For each one enemy hit by the skill, the character gains 1 stack of stamina. Let us read. Fatigue is a debuff. It cannot be triggered. It cannot trigger the traits act again for another time. So it basically just means you can't use act again when she's fatigued. Period. Dot. Stamina, for each 1 stack, your crit is increased by 1%. And when you have 10 stacks, your damage is increased by 10%. When you have 20 stacks, your crit damage is increased by 10%. And when you have 30 stacks, your damage and crit damage are further increased by 10%. Stamina is bonkers. The more you hit, the more often, the better she is for it. So this is a phenomenal trait all within itself. Now at 2 stars, we don't see a tremendous amount of change, only in that her stamina now stacks up to 20 times instead of 10. So it's a decent improvement. At 3 stars, now we see that her fatigue lasts for 2 turns instead of 3. So shedding that off makes a pretty big difference in the grand scheme of things and is absolutely great. At 4 stars, we see that we still have the same cooldown, but now we're able to stack stamina up to 30 times. For each 1 enemy additionally hit, she gains that 1 stamina, and after hitting an AoE attack, she's going to act again, blah, blah, blah. That's all the same. So really good getting up to 30 times. Here comes that 5-star ability. Fatigue lasts until the next turn. No more cooldown. Next turn, you're good, do it again. Means acting again every turn that you hit with an AoE. Stamina still stacks up to 30, but at the start of battle, she gains 10 stacks of stamina, just period dot for free. And then, of course, AoEs trigger the act again. This is bonkers. The amount of turns, amount of actions, amount she can do is absolutely phenomenal, and I love it. This character waylays, destroys. I use her in Clash all the time, just mops things up. No stopping her. Absolutely love her. So for me, this is an insanely powerful trait, especially at 5 stars. And so I suggest her to be a tier 0 as far as shard farm priority, and getting her up to 5 stars to reach her potential. Up next is one of my favorite characters in the game as well, and that is OG Safiyyah. She is mega powerful. She comes in with her trait Thorny Rose, which is at the start of the turn, Safiyyah locks onto one random enemy within 4 tiles of herself and inflicts that Hangman's Mark for 1 turn. Attacking enemies with Hangman's Mark deals additional physical damage up to or equal to 16% of the target's HP, but no more than 150% of Safiyyah's physical attack. Now at 2 stars, we see that Safiyyah is able to lock on an enemy the same and do everything the same, with the exception of now she gets a 50% lifesteal on that attack for those people with Hangman's Mark. Really good stuff. Like that lifesteal, it does a lot for her. At 3 stars, we see she now locks onto 2 random enemies, or 2 enemies within 4 tiles of herself, and inflicts that Hangman's Mark. Moreover, she now deals physical damage equal to 25% of the target's HP and up to 175% of her physical attack. Really, really powerful and good stuff right there. And then at 4 stars, she's still locking on 2 within 4 tiles and lasts for 2 turns. However, she now is got that lifesteal up to 75% instead of 50. There's no other changes in the trait. More lifesteal, more sustainability, great stuff. At 5 stars, she now is locking onto 2 enemies within 6 tiles. We get a 2 tile difference from 4 stars to 5. So now within 6 tiles of herself, and when she's attacking them, she's shredding 32% of the target's HP up to 200% of Safiyyah's physical attack. She is the original piercing damage character, and she has tremendous relevance even to this day in the game. Absolutely love OG Safiyyah. She does a ton for me. This is a trait that is great, but only becomes better the higher level it is, and she reaches her full potential when she is 5 stars. And so, in my opinion, I think OG Safiyyah is a tier 0 as far as shard farm priority, and you absolutely want her 5 stars. Up next is SP Safiyyah, or Safiyyah Promise, as she's alternatively known as. And so she comes in with her trait MS Combat Staff. She increases her attack of all allies within 5 tiles of the character by 5% when attacking targets with the mobile squad mark. After actively casting support skills or passive triggering healing effects on an ally, she grants them 1 random level 1 attribute buff, lasting for 2 turns. At the start of the turn, she inflicts mobile squad mark on all enemies within 6 tiles of the character, lasting for 2 turns. It has the potential to be a lot of marks. At 2 stars, we see a slight difference in that now she's increasing the attack of allies by 10% instead of 5. Otherwise, we don't see a change in this trait. And at 3 stars, we see that she's increasing that attack by 10% still, but deals 15% more damage and piercing damage when performing assisted or alert when around her. That's fantastic. Of course, attacking those mobile squad marks, sorry. But that's a huge boost and buff and a big change in that trait. Really, really good stuff right there. At 4 stars, we see that she's now increasing the attack by 15% instead of 10, and we're now giving 1 level 2 buff to those allies that she casts a support or passive whatever on. Absolutely massive. Great stuff right there. And then at 5 stars, now it's all allies within 6 tiles of the character get those buffs of 15 and now 25% more damage, which is a huge shift. It's increased by 10%. And then after casting that skill, she grants 2 random level 2 buffs instead of just the 1, which is awesome and really powerful. So her trait is phenomenal, absolutely great, fantastic team play. I think the break point, in my opinion, is 3 stars. And that's where I think you're healthy to choose to stop. Maybe you push it up to 4 stars. I don't know. You're pushing for a buff. The really big damage increases, of course, are up there at 5 stars. But I think that you're good to stop at 3 stars and get everything you need out of this character. I think her shard farming priority is a tier 0 because she absolutely needs that. You got to get her up there because you absolutely want that piercing damage boost for when you're assisting an alert attacking. You don't get it otherwise at 1 and 2 stars. So get her up to 3 stars ASAP. But I think you're good at stopping at 3 stars. So tier 0 shard farm priority, stop at 3 stars in my opinion. Up next is our girl Samantha with her trait Pious Prayer. This increases the healing received by all allies, 3 tiles around Samantha, by 10%. If an ally is injured after receiving a single target attack, she consumes 1 energy to heal them for 40% of her magical attack. And this can be triggered up to 2 times per round. It's so tragic that this is limited to single target attacks, but it is what it is. At 2 stars, the healing received by allies is now increased to 20% instead of just the 10, but the rest of the trait remains the same. Oh, I'm so sorry. No, it can be triggered up to 3 times per round. So 2 stars, we get a lot of value out of the 2-star boost. We can trigger it up to 3 times per round instead of just 2. Now, at 3 stars, we see that we still get the same amount of healing received within the same tiles, and she consumes that 1 energy in order to heal those allies, but now there's no limit on how many times she can do that. So as long as she's got the energy for it, she can just keep on healing them, and that's phenomenal. This is a perfect breakpoint as far as this trait in my opinion. At 4 stars, the healing is now increased by 30%, and then of course the rest of the trait remains the same. At 5 stars, we're still limited to allies within 3 tiles of her, increased at 30%, but now we're healing for 50% of her magic attack instead of 40, with no limit at 1 energy per heal. For me, this trait has the potential to kind of go bonkers, but just never does. It doesn't do it. They should have done more with it, in my opinion, at 5 stars. It's lacking. And so, for that reason, I think that her shard farm priority is a tier 4, and I would stop at 3 stars every day, all day. Up next is our girl Simona, Mrs. OP, or low-key OP. And her trait is Winter is Coming. Increases Simona's attack and defense by 5%. At the start of turn, she gains Ice Armor with a 2-turn cooldown. So Ice Armor is that physical shield, does some really good things. Great stuff. At 2 stars, the effect is improved. So now she's getting attack and defense by 10% instead of just 5. And then at 3 stars, we see that now when she hits dying, she now automatically gets Armor of Ice applied to her. Really, really good stuff, but this can only be activated 1 time per battle. And then at 4 stars, we see that her attack and defense is increased up to 15% instead of 10, but the rest of the trait remains the same. And then at 5 stars, we're still getting that 15%. However, when she has a shield active, her attack and defense is additionally increased by 10%, and she becomes immune to attribute debuffs. Really, really good stuff. The rest of the trait remains the same. So, while that is really good at 5 stars, it's also really expensive for a very small gain. I do not think it's worth it. If you really like Simona and you're using her all the time, there's nothing wrong with that. Go all the way. But I think it's lackluster. This character is low-key OP, but her trait is lackluster. I think she is a tier 4 as far as shard farm priority, and you should stop at 3 stars. Up next is our boy Tear with his trait Historian. This is a lot right here, but here we go. Tear's knowledge stacks max at 2. Knowledge is just stacks of an ability that allows him to I should say a buff, that allows him to cast his special abilities. Check out the guide if you don't know about it. He gains 1 stack of knowledge at the start of battle. When casting a healing or support skill, Terror's maximum range is increased by 1 tile. Upon casting the skill, he additionally heals the target for 15% of his magical attack. And at the start of the turn, Terror discovers 1 scroll on a random empty tile within 3 tiles of himself. Upon picking it up, he gains 1 stack of knowledge, and then gains 1 random level 2 buff, lasting for 2 turns. He can then move an additional 3 tiles. For every 2 stacks of knowledge, he can use a historical skill 1 time. Really big, powerful, great trait right here in Terror. At 2 stars, his max stacks now are increased up to 4 instead of 2, and he starts with 2 stacks of knowledge instead of starting with 1. Also, when he casts that skill, those skills or ability, he's now additionally healing for 20% of his magic attack instead of just 15. Really good stuff there at 2 stars. A lot of value. At 3 stars, Terror's knowledge max stacks the same, but he gains 3 stacks of knowledge at the start of battle. And he gets 1 bonus movement. Really good, big stuff right there. Fantastic. Next, at 4 stars, his max stacks is now 6. And then he gains 4 stacks of knowledge when he starts battle. Awesome. And then when he heals, he's now healing for 25% of his magical attack. Really good stuff. Nice big buff right there at 4 stars. Then at 5 stars, his max stacks is still 6, but he gains 5 stacks of knowledge upon ending battle, and his max range is now increased to 2 tiles instead of 1. That is absolutely massive. That is the change. 1 range is huge and it's great. However, in my opinion, I don't think that it's worth pursuing that extra range at 5 stars. I think you can be satisfied with Terror at 4 stars. But the better his trait is, the better he gets. And so I do recognize that about him. I think Terror is a tier 0 as far as shard farm priority, but I think you can stop at 4 stars. Up next is Daddy Tidon with his trait Battle Tested Shield. Tidon possesses block, and at the end of the turn he becomes alert to the horizontal row of 3 tiles in the target direction, dealing 60% physical AoE damage once an enemy enters this area. When actively using other alert skills, his attack increases by an additional 20%. Interesting trait right here in Tidon. Now at 2 stars, we see that his physical damage is increased to 70% instead of 60. And then at 3 stars, it's increased again to 80% from 70. And then his attack for when using alert skills is additionally increased to 30% instead of 20. At 4 stars, he is now dealing 90% AoE damage, and the rest of the trait is the same. And then at 5 stars, he is now dealing 100% physical AoE damage once an enemy walks into his alert range. And then for other alert skills, his attack is increased by an additional 40%. This is a conundrum of a trait. We have a tank with tank abilities that is being given attack traits. So for me, I thought this was really interesting. Needs to be played out, needs to be tested, needs to be checked out, this, that, and the third. But regardless, I don't see a lot here. I don't think it's great. We're literally talking about the difference of 40% in physical AoE damage. That's really it. I don't think it's absolutely great. It's a huge, heavy investment for really nothing, in my opinion. I'm so sorry if you disagree. Please don't take offense to that. With that said, for me, Tidon is a tier 5 as far as shard priority, and he should be left at 1 star all day long. Up next is the Mean Team, Team Meteor, with their trait Resolute Will of Meteor. After a non-instant active attack, they gain 1 stack of fat storage for 2 turns. At the start of battle, they gain 2 stacks of fat storage for 2 turns, and increases their attack, defense, and HP by 5%. Fat storage for each stack provided gives them a physical and magical shield equal to 10% of their HP, up to 10 stacks. When their shield type is broken, it removes all stacks. Really interesting stuff right there with that fat storage. A lot of bulk being given to these characters. At 2 stars, we see some increases here. We see that now they gain, when entering battle, 3 stacks of that fat storage, and then we also see that they get a buff to that attack, defense, and HP of 10% instead of 5. Coming in next at 3 stars, we see that each active attack, non-instant mind you, gains 2 stacks of fat storage instead of 1. And we see that when they start battle, they get 4 stacks of fat storage instead of 3. So they're getting a lot of value just there at the 3 stars, but that's not it. They also now, after active dispelling fat storage on self, regains 1 stack immediately for 2 turns. So anytime they lose that fat storage, they instantly get 1 stack back. Really good stuff right there. At 4 stars, they still get the 2 and whatnot, but when they start battle, they now get 5 stacks of fat storage instead of 4. Really good stuff. Their attack and defense and HP are all increased by 15% instead of 10 now. And when that fat storage is dispelled or removed, whatever, they now regain 2 stacks of it instead of just 1. Really powerful increase to the trait right there. And then coming in at 5 stars, when they perform an active attack, they get 3 stacks of fat storage instead of 2. At the start of the battle, they get 6 stacks of fat storage instead of 5. Their attack and defense and all that still the same at 15. However, when their fat storage is dispelled, they now instantly get 3 stacks back, and they regain 1 energy. That's massive. This trait is massive. So, for them, mind you, not the team, just for them. So, at 5 stars, this is very, very powerful on Team Meteor. And for that reason, I think that their shard farm priority is a tier 1. And it should be farmed up to 5 stars. The reason I rank it as a 1 is because it really only serves them and no other people on the team. And so I don't think that you should prioritize your gameplay around them. They're not really doing a lot for your team, so I only put them at a priority of tier 1 for that reason. If you disagree, there's nothing wrong with it. Drop down in the comments and let me know what you think. But that's my assessment of Team Meteor. Moving on, let's talk about Tristan and her trait, Crimson Fury. At 1 star, after casting Crimson Fury, it triggers an unlimited resolve, lasting until the start of the next turn. Her Berserk state lasts for 2 turns. Before attacking, if the target has a shield, the character's damage is increased by 30% and dispels 6 shields from the target. Wow. When dealing AoE damage, the physical damage dealt is considered magical damage. And at the start of the battle, the character additionally possesses Crimson Fury. When used, it enters a Berserk state and can only be used 1 time per round. And so, just to give you a little bit extra information, that Berserk state, she gains toughness and immunity to disruption. It increases her damage by 25% and reduces the healing received by 80%. So, a little extra tidbit there. And really good stuff. Of course, that Crimson Fury also is really good in that it reduces her HP by 90%. It's scary. But she deals 50% AoE damage to all enemies around her, enters that Berserk state, and gains an act again. All cooldowns are reset. All energy is recovered. Massive. So, moving forward. At 2 stars, do we see a big difference? Kinda. We see now that when she enters that Berserk state, she gets a crit and crit damage increase of 10%. Not terrible, not bad, but pretty good stuff right there. After that, at 3 stars, we see that now her berserk state lasts for 3 turns instead of 2 turns, but otherwise we don't see any changes in the trait. And then at 4 stars, we see that now her unlimited resolve lasts 2 turns instead of just the 1. That's a massive change right there. And then of course, during her berserk state, her crit and crit damage are now increased by 20% instead of just the 10. That is a pretty big change and shift right there, and a really good buff with that star level. And then at 5 stars, her unlimited resolve now lasts for the next 2 turns, which is the same as what it was at 4 stars, but that berserk state lasts for 4 turns instead of 3. Really good stuff right there. The crit and crit damage are still 20%, but the non-instant skills of cooldowns is reduced by 2 turns. The energy cost is reduced by 1, and then the rest of the trait remains the same. We see a lot of value right there at 5 stars, doing some really good stuff. Really like that she's able to get those cooldowns reduced by 2 turns, and then the energy cost down reduced. That's massive. You want her to go in to nuke, be vulnerable, mind you, she can't die, but to do tons of damage as quickly as possible. Reducing that cooldown and energy cost is absolutely pivotal in doing that. And so for me, Tristan is a tier 0 in shard farm priority because her trait really pops off at 5 stars, and I think you should do just that. Get it up to 5 stars ASAP. Coming in at the end of the list is our boy Xavier. Xavier is the solo carry apparently, because that is the name of his trait. And for each enemy within range 2 tiles around Xavier, his attack is increased by 4% up to 16%. And at the start or end of the turn, if there are enemies within 1 tile radius around him, he deals an additional 30% physical damage. Pretty decent stuff. Really interesting trait right there. And at 2 stars, we see a slight increase in that his attack is increased from 5% up to 20 for each enemy around instead of the 4 to 16, but the rest of the trait remains the same. And at 3 stars, we see that attack increases from 6 to 24, but the rest of the trait remains the same. And at 4 stars, we see an increase of 7 to 28% for each enemy around. The rest of the trait remains the same. And then finally at 5 stars, for each enemy within 2 tiles around Xavier, his attack is increased by 8 up to 32%. And then he is now dealing an additional 40% physical damage. So Xavier's trait obviously gets stronger as it goes, much like everybody's, but his is negligible. It's not great. This is one of those characters that came out the beginning of the game, part of its original conception, and his trait is honestly lacking. It needs more. And so for that reason, I don't suggest you farming it up and getting it higher. He has a tier 5 in his memory shard farming priority, and he should be left at 1 star in my opinion. And so with that said, that wraps up my memory shard farming priority list. These are all of our characters all the way up to SP Inanna, who as of the time of this recording is not out yet, and I hope that this benefits you. Remember, as of the time of this recording, we're looking at a nice anniversary event, memory shard, bonuses in that to where we're going to be able to do double the memory shard farming. I want everybody to be completely informed and aware. We also are looking at the next round of Tower of Adversity here in just a few weeks, so getting those characters tougher and stronger as fast as possible can be a big deal. I hope this list benefits you and helps you for that reason. Please be sure to drop down in the comments and let me know what you think. Did it help you? Is this a waste of time? Do you think I'm wrong on some things? What would you change? I'm ready to hear all of it. Just please be respectful. And please, I'm going to say this as like a disclaimer again. This is, of course, a fact. Every character benefits from 5 stars. No two ways about it. This list reflects the most value for star levels and how urgently you should level them. That is the point. If you love a character, always prioritize them. This game is beautiful in that the characters you enjoy are relevant and they can be played regardless. I love that. So please pursue that above all else. With that said, thank you so much for watching. A huge shout out to my Patreon members. You guys are really coming in and making the difference here. I'm super duper grateful for y'all. You do everything for me. Thank you so much. I also want to give a special shout out to Winds of Ambience. Thank you so much for the super banks. I really appreciate you. It means a lot to me. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you appreciated the video. Take it easy, and until next time, I will catch you later. Bye.